Valhalla Tactical has released an option for offset red dot users that doesn't break the bank like their $250 ruck does. It incorporates a modified scope ring to mount the red dot and orients it at 90 degrees to the scope body before offsetting it. This allows the red dot to be at the same height as your scope reticle and removes the need for having base plates to raise or lower the optic like the T-Rex arms or Aero socket mounts mentioned in my previous videos. Having the red dot slaved to the scope ring also ensures the red dot maintains perpendicularity with your bore axis as well. This is currently offered for the Aero Precision Ultralight Scope Mount, currently the 30mm only, as of the making of this video, and the American Defense Manufacturing Recon mount, both their 30mm and 34mm options. The hanger costs $40 for the Aero Precision model and $55 for the ADM Recon. And each optic plate costs $35. For those wondering, to my knowledge, Aero only makes their ultralight mount to be 1.5 inches tall, whereas ADM Recon mount is offered at a 1.63 inch and the industry 1.93 inch options. Alright, look at this nonsense. So it took some finagling, but I managed to get the Arasaka offset mount also thrown on this rail too, to give you a comparative idea of how much cant each of these mounting options gives you. And you can see they line up almost identically with each other. Obviously, this hollow stud on the rear here is mounted 90 degrees. So when viewing through both of these, you can see that the Arasaka obviously has the wider left and right field of view, and the Valhalla has a taller up and down field of view. But both are acceptable, though a wider field of view is more desirable, I think, for a lot of people. Additionally, I've noticed, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people who also shoot offset know that when you do cant your rifle, you get a significant portion of your field of view obstructed by the ocular of the rifle scope. And purely anecdotally, I feel I have a larger field of view when looking through the Arasaka with the left and right field of view than I do with the Valhalla. But I think that's with extended use of this hanger, that feeling will go away. One of the things to consider with this option is the scope you are intending to use. I prefer to have my red dot mounted closer to my eye, and my hollow sun just barely fits between the windage cap and the ocular of my Vortex razor. So much so that during testing I actually had to move this to the front ring, and because I couldn't even remove this windage cap. So if you have a razor and this is what you're hoping to do, this probably isn't the best option unless you are comfortable with having it mounted to the front ring here. Also, when you mount any optic to the Valhalla hanger, the windage and the elevation switch. And during some of my testing, it seems that I almost ran out of elevation, or windage in this case, just to get it zeroed. So your elevation adjustment here, when canted, now becomes your windage. And underneath here, your windage knob now becomes your elevation and elevation adjustment. It might not be immediately noticeable, but a large downside to rotating the optic 90 degrees is how most of the optics are designed to have their adjustments on the side. So when the hollow sun is mounted like this, it's actually quite difficult to get to this new elevation adjustment turret here. And that's kind of a pain in the butt, but once you end up having this thing sighted, it's not going to be much of an issue. Now you might have noticed already, but in addition to the elevation adjustment, there is another problem. These torque screws that mount the hanger to the Scout mount are tucked up in there in a really cramped spot. So in order to mount this hanger and your red dot, there is a specific procedure you need to follow to mount it correctly. So to install an RMR style optic to the Valhalla Tactical hanger, you simply take your hanger with your scope obviously in the scope mount. You set that into place, you set your screws here, and you can torque them down to the appropriate torque. You come in with the optics plate here, set that into place, you put your screws in, you set those to the appropriate torque, and then you come in now with your Trichicon or hollow sun in my case, and you're able to set your screws in the top and then set the torque spec. So it's not a painful process. But there is a huge issue though if you are trying to mount T1 style optic to this to your scope mount. So if we were to follow the same process, we'd come in with the hanger like we did before, bolt that into place. We'd come in with the optics plate, set that into place. But when we go to mount the T1 to the optics plate, all 4 of these screws are actually obscured by your scope body. So you're unable to actually mount this in the correct procedure as you would the RMR. So in fact, in order to actually mount this appropriately, you need to take the optics plate, mount that to the hanger because these 4 screws get covered by the T1. You're then taking the T1, mounting that to the optics plate because now you can access these 4 screws. And then you can then take this whole thing and put it onto your scope. But wait, now the screws to be installed on the bottom of to mount the ring to the scope mount are completely obscured by the optic here. They're so scrunched up there, and they're even worse than with the RMR's case. So I contacted Valhalla Tactical about this because I'm sitting here, it took me a while to sit there and think to myself, am I doing something wrong? Like, how the hell do you actually install this thing? And they said it's actually with the T1 optics, this is a known issue, which is kind of disappointing because if you do install it the way I had done, you would not be able to set the appropriate torque spec on those bottom base screws there. And they said in order to properly tighten those down, well, you can't necessarily tighten them to torque spec, but to get them tightened down you needed a stubby Torx wrench because for the Aero Precision it uses torque style screws. So it's a known issue that Valhalla knows about, yet it's not advertised anywhere on their website, and it's kind of disappointing. So you're able to torque down the screws appropriately on your T1 to the optics plate to the hanger, but not the hanger to the scope mount, which is probably the most critical torque spec that you need to maintain. So that's kind of disappointing. Okay, so the pros, cons, and conclusions of the Valhalla Tactical offset hanger. I like that Valhalla Tactical has come up with this product for the market. The pros are you have a true offset optic that maintains that perpendicularity with your bore axis. You don't need elevation plates to match your scope height, and as it naturally holds the scope at the same height. The optic at the same height as your scope. And it removes clutter from your rails and allows you to run backup irons if you want. This is also priced reasonably compared to their options at $70 for the Aero option and $85 or so for the ADM Recon mount. The cons, the following cons are more of gripes, but there's one definite true con. So the gripe number 1 is some of the scope mounting locations. There's the incompatibility, like I have with my Vortex Razor, but I can understand that. They can't dictate the size of this optic with the ocular and the windage turret of the Vortex Razor, and I can always run it in the front ring if I needed to. So that's just a gripe. Gripe number 2 is the issue with the elevation being kind of hidden underneath the scope, underneath the optic when you have it mounted. Again, it's a pain in the ass to get in here to actually get to that elevation knob, but once you set it becomes a non-issue. But the one major con that I have with this is with the whole T1 footprint mounting. I don't like the fact that a specific tool is needed to use this option. I don't like that Valhalla Tactical knows about it, but it isn't listed as a known issue on their website. However, I think it would be great though if they were able to add a little stubby Torx wrench in the packaging for the optics plate to the models that have this known issue. But now, in order for me to actually really test this, I need to go out and buy a set of stubby Torx wrench just to get this to actually reliably bolt down to the scope mount. But also, that issue of the captured screws there is just kind of the nature of the game of trying to have an optic offset onto the ring like that. So there's a con and a gripe kind of rolled into one on that. So the conclusion of all this, the Valhalla Tactical offset hanger is clever. It's a viable option for a lot of people who are looking to run an offset red dot in addition to their scope. It's nice that it can integrate with popular scope mounts without adding a large price tag to do so. So they currently advertise that they're going to be adding more options that will be coming out in the future. So it will be interesting to see what other scope mounts will be supported. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you.